Hello everybody, and good afternoon or good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. I can see that we have people joining us from Indonesia, from Moscow, from Seattle, from South Korea, from Belgium. So we are already a group of people who are spread all over the world. And it's just such a joy for me to have the opportunity to meet with you today. Today is a special day. It's the longest day in our year, and it's a day where many of us, we also spend some time looking back at the year so far and also thinking ahead, and often also where we celebrate, just the simple fact that we are alive. So I just wish you a very good day and want to thank you so much for joining. Before we dive into today's topic, I would really like to invite you to take a moment and just come into the body and just to be present and to touch base with some silence. As we are also aware that we're joining here because we have a shared interest, in the topic. So the topic today is part of a series around pain. And I'm quite confident that when you show up today, that it's also because something that you have personal experience with in one way or another. So the fact that we come together here is really out of care. It's really out of a positive motivation. It's really out of a wish for understanding and for supporting ourselves and for learning. And it's a very, very beautiful thing. So let's just begin with taking a moment to just acknowledge that we're here. So we can just simply allow awareness to come into the body. So being aware of where you're standing or where you're sitting. And then just allowing awareness to rest within the body. If you like, you can take a few deeper in-breath and just really relaxing with the out-breath. But if not, just allowing the breath to be normal, to be natural. And just resting with this moment as it is. Resting in your situation as it is. Perhaps taking a moment to appreciate that you have taken some time out to practice and to reflect and to join with others who have a similar interest. Perhaps tapping into that sense of community, both with the people who are joining the call now, but also others who may be listening to it later on. And as awareness is resting within the body, we can know the body as it is now. We can feel the body. In a very general way, we may notice if it feels open, soft, if there's areas of tension, tightness. We may notice if there is what we call pain. Intense sensations. And just holding space for our experience as it is. For however the body is in this very moment. Meeting it with openness, not demanding that it should be different. And just resting here in this open awareness that's not demanding anything to be different. Just feeling the aliveness in the body. Feeling the situation you're in. For me, there's a sound from outside passing by. There's traffic, there's birds. And there's a sense of silence also, of quietude in the middle of it all. So whatever is passing through your experience, just knowing it and resting with it. Okay, so if you had your eyes closed, you're very welcome to open them. So today I would like to share some reflections on the topic of pain and how we can transform pain, how we can use pain as an opportunity for transformation. And I'll be sharing the reflections in the light of one of the most fundamental Buddhist teachings, one of the most fundamental teachings that the Buddha gave. So some consider it an overall framework for his teachings. And it's a teaching that's very familiar. It's one that all the Buddhist school agree is really containing the essential message of the Buddha. So even though the very many Buddhist schools have varieties in their practice styles, in the philosophical points that they're highlighting, then everybody agrees that within this teaching is really an essential message from the Buddha. So I trust that many of you are familiar with the life story of the Buddha, how he grew up in a very privileged position and in luxurious circumstances, and how he was shielded from poverty as a child and as an adolescent, and how he one day ventured outside of the palace and was confronted with the reality of the world. According to the legend, he saw a person that was very old, a person that was sick, and a person that was dying. But he didn't just see that. He also saw the pain associated with the situation. So it was this confrontation with reality. It was this reality shock that made him wonder if it would ever be possible for humans to be free from this suffering. So this was the starting point of years of searching and practice, where he dealt with this existential question in different ways. And after the Buddha accomplished permanent awakening from confusion, he spent some time hanging around the place where he had attained enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. Because in the beginning, he didn't want to teach, because he assumed or he feared that what he had understood would sound so extraordinary that there would be no way that we would understand it, that the people at his time would understand it, and we can assume that they would be like us. But luckily for us, he was persuaded to teach. And in the first teaching that he gave, he shared with his listeners this essence of his profound realization. It was sort of the understanding and the insight that he had gained after years of spiritual practice. So the first teaching he gave was in the deer park in Sanat in India. And this teaching has become what we call the Four Noble Truths. In this teaching, the Buddha shares four insights or invitations, or four truths, if you like. The first is that there's suffering. The second is the truth about the arising or the origin of suffering, or the cause of suffering, we could say. And the third is the truth about the end of suffering. So sorry, I was just checking because I thought maybe Beth was sending a message. So I have a supporter behind. So the third was a truth about the end of suffering. And the fourth is the path to the end of suffering. So these are really four insights or four truths that addresses our situation. It really speaks to our situation as it is right now. And the Buddha, he saw himself as a compassionate doctor who recognizes our situation and then shows us how we can live in a more skillful way. So the Four Noble Truths is based on a medical scheme where we begin with naming the disease, naming the cause for the disease, giving the prognosis in terms of healing, and finally the treatment that one should apply. So this is sort of an ancient medical scheme that we would find in Ayurveda also, as I understand it. So the first statement is about our situation, that there's suffering. We usually hear the word suffering as it is the translation of the Pali and Sanskrit word dukkha. But sometimes this word is also translated as stress or frustration or pain or dissatisfaction, because there isn't an English word that really covers the full meaning of dukkha. And often nowadays, we will also find that it's not being translated. Because pain is one of the translations, I would like to suggest that we go with this as a translation for the reflection today. Personally, I find that it can be very helpful to use different words like a lens for our contemplation, because different words, they can help open up our understanding in new ways. At least that's been my experience. And it's also my experience that sometimes we can get a little bit habituated or immune to the meaning of a specific word. And especially the word suffering, sometimes it can become a bit abstract, even though it's something we all have a personal experience with. So what did the Buddha say? He said that birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, and death is suffering. So if we look at this through the lens of pain, then we hear it, that there is pain. And that, more specifically, that birth is painful, aging is painful, being sick is painful, and death is painful. He also continued and said that the union with what is displeasing is painful, and that separation from what is pleasing is painful. Not to get what one wants is painful, and getting what one doesn't want is painful. I don't know what happens in you when you hear this, but I find it very interesting when I hear it, that there's part of me that immediately knows that it's true. And yet, we may also see that this is exactly what we try to forget. This is exactly what we try to turn our attention away from. This is what we try to ignore. This is what we don't like to think about. We'll talk later about why that may be, and also what the price is that we pay for this. But for now, let's have a closer look at them. So birth is painful. Normally, we consider birth to be a wonderful event. When a child is born, it's something that we celebrate. It's something that we rightfully appreciate. Holding a new baby, let it be a human baby or a kitten or a puppy, for example, is something that really opens our hearts and gladdens our minds. And yet, it's also true for most people that giving birth is a painful process. And if we look at the birth process and the experience from the child's side, then we also know that it's associated with pain. So in regards to physical birth, we can say yes, it is associated with pain. For me, even though I think this is something everybody knows, for me personally, it was actually a bit surprise when I had my first child. Somehow I had expected that I would be an exception and that I just spontaneously would be more or less able to have a natural and pain-free labor delivery. And yet I was really surprised, and I was really being woken up to the reality when I was in the situation myself. But we can also look at it in a more symbolic way or in a psychological way. We can look at it when we look at significant transitions in our lives, situations where we are in a kind of womb and our life is in a certain way, and then we're born into a new situation. Often this is also associated with pain. And I can't help thinking about the situation many of us experienced recently, where our lives was turned upside down due to the lockdown and the restrictions in relationship to the pandemic. Our homes may have been like a refuge, a place where we could retreat to. And then all of a sudden, many of us experienced them as a kind of prison. It was not easy for many of us to be born into this new situation. It was painful. And we can also say that birth is the condition for aging, sickness, and death. So, in that sense, the very fact that we are born will also bring some amount of pain into our life. So, this was just some thoughts around birth and pain. And then there's aging. So, it says that aging is painful. And how does that sound? And again, it resonates, doesn't it? Especially if we ourselves are aging. We may not like to see it, but we may experience that we begin to have more pains and aches, and that our body gets less flexible and we easier loses the strength in the body. We may also experience that our memory weakens and that our senses lose their sharpness, and this can be very painful. We also know that there's a point in time in our life when the years that we look ahead at are fewer than the years that we have behind us. And there may be more and more experiences that we know that we will never have, or that we have had for the last time. So it could be that going on a trek, it could be completing a long education, it could be having a child, it could be paying back a new loan to the bank. All of this can be associated with pain for us. And then there is the statement that illness is associated with pain, or illness is pain. And we can see that. We know that. We know that very well, isn't it? We know that illness is painful both for the person who is sick, but also for the ones that are close to us. And yet it's part of our human experience. Tomorrow night, here where I am in the television, they will be broadcasting a new documentary with the title Living as We're Dying. It's featuring a group of women suffering from incurable breast cancer. And reading about this film, I was also reminded of how illness and sickness doesn't just affect the ones who are ill, how it really affects all of us. Even when it's not our own pain, we can feel the pain of others. We have empathy. And, we can feel the pain of others unless we close off. So it's really is this pain of illness. It's not just when it reaches us, we're suffering from it, but it really is also something that is shared among all of us, the suffering of illness or the pain of illness, if we're open, if we have empathy. And then the last one, that death is painful. We know that the loss of a loved one is one of the most devastating experiences that we can have as a human being. And also that our own death can be related with a lot of sometimes unconscious fear, and it can be a very, very painful experience to die. But also during this time, we see that it's not only the death of people we know that causes us suffering. During this time with the pandemic, and maybe we've been seeing how the death numbers are increasing, and just knowing all the suffering that's going on, it's been a lot of suffering for many of us. And in recent times, we've also seen very, very painful recordings of people dying And we can just really recognize this, isn't it? That death is associated with pain, that death is painful. The Buddha also continues and illuminates something about what it is about these experiences that makes them painful. Union with what is displeasing is painful. So we know that. It's painful to be together with pain. It's painful to be together with an unpleasant sound. It's painful to be together with financial problems. It's painful to be together with a difficult colleague. It's painful to be together with a difficult boss. We know how it's painful when we're together with something that we don't like. Separation from that which is pleasant is also painful. So we know in our experience how being separated from health is painful, how being separated from employment, if that is what we wish, how that is painful, how it's painful to be separated from resources, how it's painful to be separated from our loved ones and so forth. And not to get what one wants is painful. So when we don't get the recognition that we had hoped for, when we don't get the holiday that we had hoped for, when we don't get the presents that we had hoped for, when we don't get the partner that we had hoped for, then we experience some pain. So we see pain in many, many forms. And we're really invited to see this as the nature of our existence. We don't want to deny in any way, and we're not invited to do so. We don't want to deny that there are many, many things that we can appreciate in life. But we also have to acknowledge that there is pain, that it's a built-in feature. It's a very universal experience. It's not something personal. And just that acknowledgement can be such a source of relief, because we start to see that it's not our fault that we experience pain, that it doesn't mean that we have gotten it wrong. It doesn't mean that we are the one exceptions among the humans who have gotten it wrong. And the reason that the Buddha really wanted us to see our situation is because by seeing it, then we also start to get a key for changing it, for transforming it. And that's laid out in the second, third, and fourth noble truth. I will not here today go through them in a very systematic way. There are many places where you can find that. But what I want to do is to explore some aspects of it in a very simple way. And again, with this center of acknowledging our situation as it is. And it's really important is that we acknowledge our situation, because often when we look into it, we can see that it's often as if we would like to skip this step and just jump to problem solving, just fixing it. So here it's really suggested that we see our situation, that we let the message in. And when we do that, then we begin to realize that there's nothing in this world, that there's no person, that there's no object, that there's nothing that's going to make us immune to pain. And just by realizing this, we may start to feel that it's as if the mind begins to let go, that it's as if it begins to free the mind. Oh, so it's not something that I have to fight, because it's actually part of it. So if we can understand pain and understand that it's part of being human, then we can relax. We can relax a little bit more with our own difficulties. We can learn to accept them. And the more we learn to open up to the difficult, then we stop expecting more from the world than it can deliver. So we're really saving us a lot from a lot of struggle, a lot of disappointment, It's like freeing up a lot of energy. And we need to acknowledge our situation with all the kindness that we have. It can be known, this pain. It can be known, this life of ours. It can be known, this situation that we are in. And it really opens up to this new way of relating to what's difficult. Because we also start to see that it's when we don't want to acknowledge it, when we don't want to accept it, that we are fighting it, that we try to find someone to blame. And often we end up blaming ourselves. But we really need to come close to it, to find a compassionate response to it. So this is the truth of pain. This is where we find ourselves. This is how it is. And until we do that, then we'll really never be motivated to explore the situation further. We'll never be motivated to take the teachings and the approach to move beyond. Until then, we'll always find ways to make up stories about how it is and to ignore it. And in the end, we'll just not get anywhere. And really, what makes it difficult to come close to our own pain is our reactivity and the underlying fear. I'm suffering, and then therefore there's something wrong with me. We have this sort of way of assuming it. We have this way of taking it a bit personal. And then we fight it. This is my suffering. And we don't even see that the person next to us is also suffering. So it really creates another kind of pain. It creates loneliness and it creates separation. And just looking at our experience with physical pain, if we look closely, we see that it's not just the physical sensations in themselves that make up the experience of pain. It's also all the thoughts and emotions around it. What we often talk about as our reactivity, the hopes and the fears and the sadness, the stories in our minds about what could have been, what should have been, and the fear of how it will be. I remember speaking to a person some years ago who had suffered from health anxiety. And health anxiety is the fear of illness and of losing oneself. So he'd suffered from this a number of years, and it was really something that had caused great pain in his life and affected his life and the joys in his life to a great extent. So he came to talk at a time when the anxiety was still there. But he was also kind of puzzled because what he had actually always been fearing getting a particular illness, and now he had gotten another illness. So his anxiety was to get a specific neurological illness, and now he had gotten cancer. And he was very puzzled that the cancer illness didn't cause more distress than it did. Somehow, actually coming face to face with a serious illness was not as painful or distressing as the thought and imagination of getting another serious illness. It was very interesting to him. And it made it really clear to him how big a role imagination and expectation plays into anxiety and the pain that he was experiencing in this moment around illness. It's not that it was pain-free for him to face cancer. It certainly was very, very challenging, but he didn't have as many worries and fears around it as he had around the other illness and the thought of it. So the magnitude or the relative size of pain is not just the physical sensation or the seriousness of the situation we are in. It's also our worries, our hopes, and our fears. And then there's the pain of change. Whatever we have is going to change. And part of the pain that we experience is that it has arrived in our lives without us wishing it. Something has changed in a direction we didn't want or we didn't expect. So this is the first noble truth, the truth of pain, and the task of understanding this, of seeing this and acknowledging it. So the second noble truth discusses the cause of this. What is the cause of it? So we see that there's some pain that's related to being human, but we also see that there's a layer of pain that is related to how we perceive our situation, to our expectations, that which we in general terms talk about as our reactivity. It's not just pain, but if you like, maybe we could call it, it's also paining, or the process of experiencing pain. So why is it that we suffer in this way? So according to the Buddha's teachings, it's because we misperceive the way things are. We don't see them clearly. We have wrong expectations. Based on our expectations, we act and we create habits that keeps us in a loop of not seeing how things are. We grasp at things, states, experiences that by nature are changing, and it's not something that's lasting. And we do this in many, many different ways. As an example, which isn't really related to physical pain, but which is related to mental pain, maybe. I just want to tell you about my situation right now. So I even wanted to start saying every morning, but it's actually not every morning. It's just the last few weeks. But the last few weeks I've been going outside and I've been looking at the roses in the garden. And I have seen how they change from being a bud to blossoming and to fading. And it's a completely natural process. And it has actually been very, very, very enjoyable. It's been beautiful. And then one day I saw in the back of my mind a story begin to arise. And it was the story, I like being a person who have roses in the garden. And then with this story, something entered the picture. Oh, this is good. And then another thought, this will not last. And then there was disappointment and there was worries because there was this, I like it the way it is. And the worry that it will not change. And what if I won't like it equally when the roses are gone? And something else will be present at that time. So from a situation that really was very uncomplicated, enjoying the roses that were present, it became painful all of a sudden because, first of all, now it was my roses. And what does that even mean? I mean, the roses were there before I got the garden, and just because there's a piece of paper somewhere with a name on, does that mean that now these are my roses? But anyway, because there was this thought, then there was also the wish to hold on to it and the lack of trust in what would come. And this is really the cause of pain. And the situation doesn't just speak to the cause of pain, but it also speaks to the cessation of pain. So if we take something for real or for lasting that's not real or that's not lasting, like my flowers, then we have a recipe for pain. Of course, we don't mean that it's not that the flowers don't exist, but to begin to grasp onto flowers is a cause of pain. And yet we don't really take this to heart. We don't really take this message to heart. We hold on to this body being in one way. We hold on to this face being in one way, but we shouldn't do so because it will change. It will age. And we hold on to so many things, and that's really a part of what is creating this pain. And we really need to hear this. We really need to understand this. And we really need to look into our own experience and see how this is something that goes on and again and again. And we can begin to get it because we have the ability to see it. We have what it takes, because all it takes is awareness. All it takes is knowing. And then we can begin to open up when we see it. So that's the end of the extra layer of pain. That is the beginning of transforming pain. When we no longer fixate and grasp, then pain is transformed. When the grasping is stopped, then there's more freedom. So we really need to understand this as truths of possibilities and of invitations. So we're invited to look into our own experience and look at, is it possible for me to see any kind of pain? And then to acknowledge it, to embrace it, not thinking that, oh, it means that I got it wrong, but seeing how it's the same for everyone. And then looking at, is it possible to see the pain and to explore it? Exactly what is it that it's made up of? And are there any habitual thoughts and stories that is helping to maintain it, that helps us locked into the different vicious circles? And we're invited to see, is part of the pain that I'm holding too tightly. We can explore what it is that is keeping this reactivity going, exploring the resistance to change, see if that's part of it. And we're also invited to explore if it's possible for us to let be, to stop some of the struggle and not be so tight. Is it possible for us to meet our situation with openness and with compassion? Is it possible that I can see the shared humanness in this pain? Is it possible to see that for whatever reason, times when I let go, something changes? And then to be really, really curious about these moments when we let go and something shifts, something opens up, something changes. And it's also possible for us to ask if we are interested, really deeply interested in exploring the method or the path that is laid out for us, how we can work with this, to take up a meditation practice or to continue our meditation practice. So today, really, what we've been talking about is a way of seeing pain as an opportunity for transformation, seeing pain as an opportunity for transformation through really deeply acknowledging our situation and acknowledging our situation fully, rather than, as we often find, that we just want to see part of our situation. And with that, not really fully acknowledging our situation and opening to it, then there's also a part of us that has to keep it away. And with it comes a sense of separation, comes a sense of anxiety and a sense of loneliness. And then really also seeing pain and, sorry, I just checked what. Okay, sorry. There was a question from Beth. So I just, sorry. So there's also the invitation to really see that it's not personal. and to see that it's the same for everybody. And so we have empathy for ourselves, and we have empathy to others, for others also. And so we can see that we're not alone in this. So there's this natural wish when we see our own pain, when we see others, if we really fully acknowledge it, then empathy arises, and we can take a step back, and we can, with more clarity, respond to the situation with compassion. And then seeing what is it that keeps it going, and we can begin to see that it's because we don't fully see the way things are, and we can begin to see the different stories and patterns and reactions and all of that, which is really part of keeping this moving. And then we have an opportunity, just with the seeing, to step out of it and to experience more freedom, and to have a sense and experience of being more in accordance with the way things are. So these were some reflections from me today, and I would be really interested to hear if there's any of you who have any questions, or anything you would like to anything you would like to discuss. If not, then maybe we can take some time just to sit together again. So we can just again either sit with the eyes open or sit with the eyes closed. And just allowing awareness to rest within the body. And again, as we're resting within the body, just being aware of the sensations in the body. The changing sensations in the body. And being aware if there's any areas where we may experience more intense sensations. What we call pain. And just seeing how usually we're not in doubt if something is painful or not. And if we find this, then we can just allow awareness to rest here. Feeling the sensations here. See the pattern of physical sensations that makes up what we call pain. Perhaps seeing the associated thoughts, images, perhaps emotions. and seeing how awareness is able to hold it all. And we may gradually open up the field of awareness to also include sounds, the space around us, each other. Seeing our connectedness, appreciating ourselves, appreciating each other. And just, if you like, really have a commitment to bring some of this acceptance into our lives, into our meeting with each other. This care, this understanding. Okay. And I also want to let you know that we are actually very, very, very fortunate because in just a few weeks' time, there will be the opportunity to actually receive teachings from Mingyur Rinpoche on not just how to work with pain and transform pain, but also all other aspects of our experience. So, as you may know, this summer we will be having a series of online retreats. And the very first is the A Joy of Living online retreat, where we will be learning more about this path that I spoke about today, this path and these methods that really, when we look at our situation, that we feel encouraged and motivated to continue on or to embark on. So I hope that we'll see you during the summer retreat, and you can register at events@tergar.org. And I also wish you a continued beautiful Sunday, and looking forward to meeting you again at some point. And thank you, Beth, Marcia, everybody who's helping and supporting